was it Bilbo's song? In every wood there's a different green, I think it was. I couldn't help but smile because that just sprang instantly to mind there, out of the blue. Hello everyone, welcome to the next part of Returning Truths. I've been waiting for this one, most of all. Trees and forests, trees and woodlands. There are many more examples I'll be using in this video than I believe there was about 4 in my hills and mountains video. And on that note, regarding the format, just before we begin, again, I'm not entirely convinced that these photos are the best photos, and indeed some of the selections actually aren't special because of the particular image, but more because of the subject. In this case, trees and woodlands. So I've had to just choose a photo that represents the subject, whereas in many cases in the first episode I chose a particular hill or mountain because that particular hill or mountain was special. That photo was special. The Grove, or the River-esque walk or walkway. When I first started discovering nature around 2010, 2011, 2012, I really had no woodlands in my area. We lived in one of the most deforested areas, a very flat coastal area, and I had to go to another town, about 20 minutes on the bus, just to get to a single woodland, I believe. And the Grove, as we called it, situated right next to a factory, which was where my father used to work. So I'd always known about it growing up. It was only when I was about 17, 18 or so that I started exploring it myself. So the photo that I've chosen is not actually the best representation of what this woodland walk actually was. It makes it appear more beautiful and serene than it actually was. There was a large wall that separated the woodland from the factory, graffiti on it quite often. There was a lot of rubbish as well. So the reason I've chosen the Grove is that it felt like entering another world, despite the fact that it was just a small woodland walk beside a river, the River-esque, passing the factory, passing the weir. It felt like entering another world. Even when I think about it nowadays, I have this strange dreamlike feeling, as if it's more expansive and more serene than it actually was. And of course you usually get those types of feelings when you're a child. Of course I wasn't a child, I was late teens. This is really where I started becoming engaged with nature, and it's one of the most special places, despite the fact that it's just this fragmentary, isolated part of nature. I actually believe that my interest in thresholds and liminal places and borders in particular, boundaries, relates to the opposition between the factory and the Grove walk. This wall that separated the two. It might have something to do with it. So I have very many things to talk about in this video, so we'll be quickly moving on to Yellow Craig. Yellow Craig Woodland. Many people know it for its wonderfully biodiverse and beautiful beach. It's a natural cove. This woodland is, it's hard not to smile when I think about it. It's really where I began engaging with countryside management and engaging with other people in nature, learning to volunteer. And of course the photo was particularly important as it's when I first got my first dog. You'll be able to see Samwise the loyal in that photo. But this was during the summertime that we took this photo, and I think I'm rather overdressed. Yellow Craig Woodland. I'd actually grown up there, essentially, in very much the same way as I had grown up beside the grove with the factory. I had many picnics there, extended family gatherings and whatnot. But it was only when I went there to volunteer that I truly appreciated Yellow Craig. I decided to do something outside of my comfort zone, outside of my character, and reach out to the East Lothian Countryside Ranger Service. And I remember meeting a man called Dave Wild, a rather fitting name, a ranger at Yellow Craig, and other sites as well, but I believe he mostly worked at Yellow Craig. I remember going for a short meeting with him. I think I must have only been about 17 or so. It's a long time ago now. I had essentially no experience with countryside management or countryside volunteering generally, but he decided to take me on, and we decided that I would volunteer at Yellow Craig every couple of weeks or so. Of course, there are many things I could talk about in regards to working at Yellow Craig, but it's really more about the woodland itself. Of course, the work that I did there is inextricable to my experience of the woodland, but I've chosen to forgo my discussion of and selection of countryside management experience and history for a specific video, because it's really about the trees and the woodlands. But I believe I will be showing some examples in this particular video. Suffice it to say, lots of tree planting, peri burr removal, which was it's a non-native invasive species. We removed that from the dunes. Sea buckthorn burning, litter picking on the beach, footpath repairs, woodland ID. That's one that I particularly enjoyed. Of course, I had no idea at the time that I would eventually study countryside management and then wildlife ecology and conservation. It was all new to me. It was a transitionary period, I think. And of course, I've spoken about this before. That particular range of years was very interesting, around 2011 to 2013. So there are many things I could talk about regarding this one small woodland beside a sand dune system. But if I was to choose one thing, I think it would be my repeated visits with my brother and friend. We used to go there quite a lot, and we had intended to create a music project. None of us are musicians, but we had intended to create a music project called Cacophonous, a dark ambient, nature-related, history, mythology-related project. We didn't really know what we were doing. We went out to the woods, went out to Yellow Craig, and recorded some Foley sounds, I suppose, if that is the correct term. Recording the rustling of the leaves, the falling of stones, the breaking of branches, things like this. So this next photo, taken in Stansted Forest, a rather beautiful oak tree. Whenever I think about my favourite trees, I always remember this one. Stansted Forest is an ancient hunting forest. I believe it was owned by the Earls of Arundel in the 1600s or so. It's a parkland and an ancient woodland as well. Rather extensive, and it's almost like an inversion, really, from my experience in my hometown and on the coast in Scotland. When I first moved down to England in the end of 2013, we lived right beside Stansted Forest. As you can imagine, I was rather pleased about that. Stansted Forest I remember going there many times, just crossing the road, 10-minute walk or so, maybe not even that, and ending up in this ancient woodland, rather extensive parkland. And I just always remember this one particular tree, just staring at it. There's something so majestic about oak trees and the way the narrow texture of the bark and the moss that grows upon the boughs. It's so rustic and so druidic. One of my aliases was Oakenwise. Of course, some of you may know that one of my earliest projects, indeed around 2013, was oakenwise.com. Remember the men from whom you are descended. Um, Dedicated to all things related to the natural world, to history, to mythology. I believe I've spoken about this project before on the channel. It was my first experience of proper English woodland, I suppose. I learnt woodland ID there, identification that is. I remember taking my guidebooks out and just spending time looking at the trees and flipping through my guidebook and trying to follow the steps and whatnot. Just such an incredible experience to live near such an extensive woodland. So we moved around a lot, rather a lot. I believe we've lived in about 6 or 7 different counties in England, and for a time, I believe actually stretched across 2 counties, we lived near the New Forest. The New Forest is, I suppose, internationally renowned, world renowned, for its history and its biodiversity. It's a royal hunting forest it was a royal hunting forest owned by William the Conqueror. It's mentioned in the Domesday Book. And the New Forest, despite the fact that it's called the New Forest, some of you might be aware that a forest is actually a term for a region owned by the monarchs of the medieval period. It includes more than just forests. It includes heathland, acid grassland, other areas like this. But it's essentially a large extensive hunting region. The New Forest is a very characteristic area in lowland England. It's known not just for its woodlands and its other habitats, but also it's very famous for its ponies, its horses, its donkeys even. You can see these as you're driving around. It's rather nice. I went to the New Forest many, many times, not just for personal enjoyment, but also to study. It's mostly situated in Hampshire, which is where my university was. It stretches into Dorset as well, but mostly in Hampshire. I went there many, many times to do plant surveys and soil sampling and things like this. The Knightwood Oak. 500 years old, I believe. It's one of the oldest oaks in the New Forest. Unfortunately, I never got to see it in leaf, but I think it's actually more impressive when you see it bare like this. It might in fact be the oldest and most majestic oak that I've seen, I believe. It's hard to remember. But the Knightwood Oak, fantastic name for a start, of course. I can't quite remember any distinctive trees. For me, it's mostly the woodlands themselves. Knightwood Oak is an exception. I went to see the Knightwood Oak twice, I believe. The first time with my parents and my first dog, Samwise, and second of all, with my twin. That particular day was very wonderful. I remember we listened to, on the way up, on the way there and on the way back, we listened to our favourite music, the Tolkien Ensemble, Verdruna. Fantastical ambient music. It was a rainy and misty day. And it's one of those days where everything felt like it connected. There's nothing nicer than just going out to the woods on a nice, quiet, calm day. The second choice in the New Forest, the 2 great sequoia trees at the Roundfield Ornamental Drive, also in the New Forest, actually not quite far from the Knightwood Oak. It's part of the Tall Trees Trail at the New Forest. So I suppose it was a rather poetic moment when me and my twin, Ryan, went to see the twin trees in the New Forest, these giant sequoias. I believe as you enter the Roundfield Ornamental Drive, there are also these archways and gateways carved out of wood with acorns and birds carved into them. So as you can imagine, rather nice as well. This next woodland, I'd almost forgotten about this one. Our Wood. That's Ower, Our Wood. I'd almost forgotten about this one, despite the fact that I've been there many, many times in 5 years. This is a sink woodland, site of importance for nature conservation, a local conservation designation, situated at Sparsholt University, which is where I studied for 5 years, half a decade. This is, of course, a rural, land-based institution, so it has its own woodland, it has its own lake. The lake is actually quite near to Our Wood. As you can imagine, I spent many, many days there. After work, just strolling through the wood, just taking in the atmosphere, especially in spring, marvelling at the fact that this woodland existed in a university setting, which I never quite got used to. And of course, for work itself, many, many woodland surveys there. Learning to use a chainsaw there, learning to coppice, using the billhook, using the bow saw, the handsaw, mammal trapping. It's very difficult, as you can imagine, to remember all the different activities that I did in that one small woodland for 5 years. It's not to say that, of course, we only worked in that woodland, but it was very handy to have a small woodland managed for conservation and conserving it for conservation, day in and day out, mapping it, doing butterfly transects there as well. So many things. I think that's what I love, actually. It's when you get to know a particular woodland so well, it has its own character. So many things. Of course, you can be in a woodland and contemplate, but it's actually when you're on your hands and knees in the dirt, coppicing and making charcoal. That's another one. Many, many different activities, and you really get a sense of what the woodland is. It's history. It's the kind of the beating heart when you work with it, when you work with the land. Now, this next woodland I don't have as much of a connection to. I didn't spend much time there. However, as will become apparent, it's special in its own way. Wistman's Wood at Dartmoor in Devon. I believe I went there. I went to Dartmoor on a 3 or 4 day trip as part of my degree, I think it was, in 2016 or 2017, so the first or second year. It gets a bit hazy after a while, as you can imagine. And on one of the days, we went to Wistman's Wood. I had known about Wistman's Wood for some time before that, and it was one of the reasons I was most looking forward to going to Dartmoor. It's Alan Lee's favourite woodland, I believe. Alan Lee, the artist, who I've mentioned many times on the channel before. I'd had a slither of hope that I might meet Alan in the woods at Fangorn Forest. You'll be able to see from the photo that this particular woodland is quite reminiscent of Fangorn. It's one of the highest, in terms of elevation, woodlands in the UK. It's an upland woodland. It's an ancient woodland. It's known for its bryophytes, its mosses, its lichens, its rocky outcrops. It's very characteristic. You don't get many woodlands like this in England or in Scotland even. Just seemingly clinging to the hills. You enter it and it's just this narrow, dark woodland strewn across the rocks, across the boulders. It's a triple SI, a site of special scientific interest. It's a national nature reserve. It's significant for conservation and history as well. I don't have too much to say about Wistman's Wood, other than that it's one of the most characteristic and most unique woodlands I've ever been to. I didn't spend much time there, but it's so distinctive, so distinctive. This next photo comes from London. I'm really not a fan of London. Of course, there are the exceptions, the cathedrals, galleries and museums, but I'm not a fan of London. Another exception, however, is Richmond Park. Richmond Park is known as the lungs of London, and for good reason. It was created as a deer park by Charles I. I've been there, I believe, 3 times, maybe 4 times. I've been there in my studies. I've been there with my twin most recently. Richmond Park is just incredible. As I say, it's a deer park. There's so many deer in this it's rather extensive walled, I would call it an enclosure, but it gives the wrong impression. It's a rather extensive area within the heart of London. It's a parkland, it's got ancient woodland, it's got large lakes, it's rather incredible. But of course, the most distinctive part about it is that it holds great herds of deer, fallow deer, red deer, muntjac, Sitka deer. Yes, I believe I went there several times on my diploma, and I think I went there on a degree as well. I think actually on the diploma I went there as part of my deer management unit. As you can imagine, that would have been quite a pertinent place to go, a useful place to go, seeing all the deer. There's something about Richmond Park that's just so special because it has this. I do overuse the word rustic a lot, but there are lots of veteran oak trees there. There's a kind of a very. It doesn't seem like doesn't seem like it should be in London, but it is. It feels like you go back in time when you go to Richmond Park. You're surrounded by these great herds of deer, and there are these crows that sit on the heads of the stags. I might be able to show you some photos of that, and it feels like it has this legendary mythic quality to it. Almost as if it shouldn't exist within London. I think what makes it quite special as well is that there's a particular gate, I believe it's called the St Paul's Tercentenary Gate, which is an installation as part of I believe it's called the Way. It looks straight down to St Paul's Cathedral, I believe. But it's this wrought iron gate with birds and ivy leaves and acorns, I believe, as well. This wrought iron gate shaped into these different natural motifs, and as you can imagine, that's something I found rather pleasing. I believe I mentioned that particular gate in the Gate essay for Reliquiae. There's nothing quite like it. Going there in autumn, when the deer are in the rutting season, when it's misty and quite damp, and the autumnal colours are coming in, and all the stags are proudly thinking about the stags, these lordly stags, making London something that the Shard and the Gherkin juxtaposed with Richmond Park. But I really should move on to my last choice. It's been difficult to order these trees and forests examples, but there's no real difficulty when it comes to Abernethy Forest. Abernethy is my favourite woodland on earth. It's a native pinewood in Scotland, in the Highlands of Scotland, in the Cairngorms National Park. Of course, you get pinewood plantations all across the UK, but the Caledonian pine forest is an ancient woodland type, distinctly native to Scotland, the Highlands of Scotland. It's been around since the end of the last ice age. It's known for its wildcat, its Scottish crossbill, its wood ants, its capercaillie, and its osprey as well. It was rather disappointing looking back at my photos for Abernethy across the years. I do have many good photos, but none that really highlight what Abernethy is truly like, aside from images like this, with the distinctive ground cover of bilberry and whatnot. I think my most treasured memory of Abernethy is when I went there with my twin. We went to Loch Garton, which is a rather stunning loch in the centre of Abernethy Forest. And we were moved by the just the serene quality of the loch. And there was a particular rock beside the loch where we felt like we had to remember the place in some way, so we wrote a little message on some paper, and we put it in amongst the shrubs and tucked it into the rock. I can imagine that didn't last for long. It probably got soaked in the rain and disintegrated, but just a little something to remember the place, I suppose. And as with many things on this list, I went there with my college group. It was part of the diploma, I believe, not the degree. But that was quite an interesting experience. I was the only Scottish person on the course, and it felt quite special just to go back to Scotland, travelling there from England, from Hampshire. And indeed we went to Abernethy Forest. And when we were there, we had a talk with a ranger who specifically looked after Abernethy Forest, and there was a moment when we were walking across a trail and hearing what he had to say about the conservation of Abernethy Forest. And out of the corner of our eyes, we spotted a capercaillie, which is a rather large black grouse. You usually hear them, but you don't see them. It's quite a special moment. In fact, I believe this capercaillie was actually perched on a branch. We just saw it fly off into the distance, this great grouse. It's a nice moment. Some closing remarks. The UK in particular has a long history of deforestation and bad forestry practices. Our forests, our woodlands on this small island are diminishing continually. The forests that we do have, the woodlands that we do have, are often filled with conifers, very dark, very dense, litter laden. On this small island, we have so few woodlands. Our percentage of woodland cover is very small, and even when we do have it, it's not managed for conservation. It's just forestry. It's just in many cases it will be plantation on an ancient woodland site. We don't treat our woodlands well. From my personal perspective, working in woodlands, surveying in woodlands, spending leisure time in woodlands like this, like making this video for example, I feel like there's nothing that matters more to me personally than woodlands. Of course, in my original video I talked about hills and mountains, but for me it's trees, it's woodlands, it's forests. I was always most passionate about them. Learning plant identification, carving in woodlands, drawing in woodlands, making these videos. I feel like woodlands are a second home in a way, and I think for the people of the past in particular, living constantly in the woodlands, making charcoal, coppicing, making their living from the woodland in sustainable ways. So that's another thing I forgot about. Camping is something I used to do quite a lot. It feels as if it's a second home that people are not truly aware of. But when you come out more and more to woodlands like these, listening to the songbirds and watching the bluebells slowly come up day by day, woodlands they grow on you. Each woodland, a tree is not just a tree, it has its own character, it has its own person, and extrapolating that out, a forest has its own character. They're all distinct, they're all unique. I believe in was it Bilbo's song? In every wood there's a different green, I think it was. I couldn't help but smile because that just sprang instantly to mind there, out of the blue. Return to your favourite woodland, and even if it's very familiar by now, try and appreciate it more. Try and just stand there, or just sit here like I'm doing, and try and relearn what it's taught you, what it has to say. Listen again to what it has to say, what it has to offer. Thanks for watching, everyone. Till next time.